Hey there, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Andrea and I love the Pilates method of exercise and I love sharing all of my information with you. And thanks again for joining me. Today I have another collab video with my Los Angeles colleague, Lesley Logan of Profitable Pilates. And today's topic is the long neck springs and why should I care? And maybe long neck springs is not something that you've heard of before. And I'm just going to explain what that is. I have some examples of the springs, and then we're going to talk about using them on the reformer and why you should care and what they do for you, just so that if you hear that term in passing, you'll be able to know what we're talking about. So a normal reformer spring, let's say normal, is like this. There's I have a Gratz reformer, and this is a standard Gratz spring. This is the part that goes on the hook that you would remove during your change of springs during your workout, and this is the hook that attaches underneath the carriage. And if you see this hook, it's not very long. It kind of is just a little bit outside of there. And then in comparison, this is a Gratz long neck spring. So it has the same attachment to the hook in front that you would change during your workout, but then the hook in back where it connects under the apparatus has a longer neck. And that's why it's called a long neck spring. Sometimes it's called a vintage spring. And in my understanding, working with Jay Grimes, this is the kind of spring that existed in Joe Pilates' studio. And I think depending on who you ask, that might be you might get a different answer. But the long neck spring facilitates the closing of the carriage, or I should say, it does not facilitate the closing of the carriage. It enables the carriage to close. I shouldn't say that, sorry. It enables the spring to close slightly before. I'm just going to show you on this reformer. So right now the springs are all closed, but if you can see right here, there's a little tiny gap where the carriage is not closed. So if the carriage were brought all the way in, it would go in just that little bit much more. So here's the spring closed, and then here's the carriage closed. And maybe you've heard people talk about the last inch. And this is the inch that they're talking about, the inch that's kind of all you. So when the spring closes, the carriage is not closed, and then in certain exercises, and my understanding is ideally in every exercise, but still on the journey, not there yet, the spring closes with the reformer, and then you close the carriage. And we'll look at an exercise to do with that concept in mind. We'll look at the elephant in just a moment. But just so you know, this is the Gratz long neck spring, and actually on my reformer right now, I actually have these new Contrology springs. I actually did an unboxing video of them on my channel, and I will link that below for you. The Contrology springs are just very, very similar. So this is the working end, and this is the long neck end that goes under the carriage. They're a little bit different in feel, but I've used both of them with great success. They both are lovely, lovely springs. I'm just going to put this away. And let's talk about why you want to care about that and how it helps the exercises. So I believe, and this is my opinion, I am not endorsing any kind of apparatus manufacturer. I am a fan of lots of different Pilates equipment manufacturers and lots of different kinds of apparatus. In general, the classical apparatus, and I'm calling it a classical apparatus because there are several manufacturers that make a very, very good classical reformer and some other apparatus as well. Gratz is the reformer that I have. And also Pilates Designs, formerly Pilates Designs by Basil, also makes a very nice classical reformer. There is a new Balanced Body Contrology reformer, designed in part by my teacher, Jay Grimes and Karen Frischman as well, who created the springs. So that is a nice classical reformer as well. I believe in Europe there is Prague, Frederick Prague makes Pilates Scandinavia apparatus, which I have clients that use. I have not seen it in person myself, but I understand it's a very nice classical reformer. There is a manufacturer, I believe, in Turkey as well. There are manufacturers in the UK, also in Italy. I believe there's also a manufacturer that makes classical apparatus. Some of the ones in Europe I've not had personal experience with, but definitely the big ones, Gratz, Balanced Body, Pilates Designs, those reformers are all great. So now let's talk about why a classical reformer is a classical reformer and why it differs from other types of reformers or other visions of the reformer made by various manufacturers. The action of how the spring works and how the carriage and wheels work, I believe, and I don't think anyone talks about this, but I feel like it's very essential information, so that's why I'm telling you. So the classical apparatus does not facilitate the closing of the carriage. The action that you're doing in your body is to bring the carriage in. And in my experience, although I have to say it's limited with the contemporary apparatus, I have used it to a degree, but I'm not an expert in contemporary apparatus. However, I do find that coming from a classical apparatus, going to a more of a contemporary apparatus, also made by Balanced Body and Bozzi and those and other manufacturers, Peak, etc., though that spring and carriage has a different action, and I feel they are designed to assist you in bringing the carriage in. And when you have assistance bringing the carriage in, you're really resisting the carriage closing so that it doesn't bang in a kind of really different way. You're not using your muscles to bring the carriage in, you're using your muscles to control the carriage, but even if you did nothing, it would probably come in anyway. And please, if you have other experience with contemporary apparatus that I do not have all the information about, and if that's untrue in your experience, please let's have a conversation about it in the comments. So leave me a question below. But I find that the muscle activation we're cultivating in our bodies, which is in and up, is exactly what you have to do on the classical apparatus to close the spring. Whereas what you're doing to bring the carriage in with control on other apparatus is slightly different muscular action. So that is my rant about that. Now let's look at it in an exercise. I'm going to pick two exercises actually, and you know me, they're the same exercise. So we're going to look at the elephant, which is a basic exercise or foundational exercise, and then we're also going to look at the tendon stretch, which is essentially the same shape as the elephant, but just a little more advanced positioning. Okay, so I'm going to be on 2 springs, and I'm going to get in place for my elephant. Okay, so the springs are closed, and now the carriage is. So I'm going to press out and press in, close the carriage, close the spring. And you know, when the carriage closes and then the spring closes, I kind of feel like when I'm teaching people, I mainly want them to be in control. And so if they are beautifully closing the carriage with control, closing the springs with control, maybe not closing the carriage all the way, but it's working nicely, their exercise is not perfect, but they're in control of closing the spring. So maybe for that person, I don't even talk about the last inch, because maybe they're doing the best that they can, holding it all together, and they can close that spring, but that's kind of all they got. And I kind of feel like that sometimes too. I have to cultivate, I'm not one who is easily round, as you probably could tell by my elephant. So I find that sometimes when I close the spring, I've got it all together, everything's working nicely, and I try to close the carriage, and then by that extra effort to close the carriage, everything kind of falls apart. And so I feel like it could go two ways. You could get deeper in your center by closing the springs, or it could kind of just, you do whatever. And the body just is like, oh no, I have to close the spring, and then it kind of freaks out and then closes it. So for myself, when I work out, I kind of see how it's going. If I'm already working so hard to make the exercise and work properly, then I might not even be concerned with the closing of the spring. And actually in my recent workouts, I've not been too concerned about closing the carriage after I close the spring. I'm sorry, I know I keep sort of mixing those up, but to be clear, the spring closes, the carriage is still out. And then the last part is you closing the carriage. Okay, sorry about the misspeaking. Okay, so today I've actually been doing better. I felt like when I tried to close the carriage completely, I still had things working. It wasn't like everything went away. So, hey, progress. So I'm gonna do a few more, and then I'll take it to the tendon stretch. And keep sort of investigating what the action of in and up. So here I am in the exercise. Spring is closed, carriage is closed. Okay, so now I'm going to look at the tendon stretch, which is kind of the same exercise, but it really points up the in and up action, right? Because if you're over here, you basically, to close the carriage, you got to pull in and up. Yes. Yeah, see, so it's harder. I can't do it. So, oh, I'm closing the spring, not so quietly, and then, oh, so you can see directly that in and up is what leads to closing the carriage. And in the elephant, that's also what is closing carriage. It's just not as, going the same direction and straight forward, if that makes sense. So that's why I think we should care about the long neck springs, because it does show us what we can do with just the power of our scoop, and even after the spring has closed. So I feel like it could ask us to do a little bit of extra squeezing the juice out of things, which I like. But for everyday teaching, does everyone you teach have to be able to close the spring and then close the carriage perfectly? Of course not. It's a work in progress, and I kind of feel like that could just take them to the next level. Like now they're working beautifully in either their elephant or their tendon stretch, and you think maybe they could work a little harder, even if I was scooping crazily to try to close the carriage that last little bit, and it finally did. But I mean, just the act of doing it, even if it didn't close, I'm doing a ton of work in my stomach. So see what you think. And if you have any other questions about the long neck springs, if that's a new thing for you, or you want to know other experiences with them, please leave me a question below. Let's have a conversation about it. And I hope this wasn't too much of a rant. Be sure to check out Lesley's video. I will also link her video about the long neck springs, why should you care, into the info box below. And I'm sure we'll have a lot to say on this topic, so do check out her channel as well. Thanks so much, and I'll see you later. Bye! Yes, and you would just do this exercise exactly the same, except you would get to not have as great a range down there. Yeah, because I like to sort of gather my stuff up here where I feel like I can find it. And then as I get more into, what is single leg pull in disguise. Yes, if we only ever did this exercise